Welcome to episode 4 of Cleaning Code with Doc Norton. I'm Doc Norton. End of episode 3, we decided to hold off on our next steps because it was going to take a little bit long, and that was going to be where we started with episode 4. Where we are right now is we still have class container, but we're really getting ready to get rid of it. We're not going to use it anymore. We actually have now, more specifically, an archive class container and directory class container. And what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to change a little bit of this, where right here, instead of making a class container, we are going to call a factory that is going to return for us either a directory class container or an archive class container, adding either one of them to this array list, and then going from there. All right, so our goal here is to change this from a class container to a factory that returns us either an archive class container or a directory class container. So let's go ahead and start driving out that factory. And let's go ahead and call it class container factory. And of course, this is the test for it. Great. And our tests. In test case. It's our standard stuff at this point. Okay. So the first thing we actually want to do here is we want to sorry. So the factory is going to have a method. Let's call it getContainer. We're going to pass it a valid directory, and it's going to give us back a directory class container. Okay. So what do we want here? We're going to assert true that our factory get container with a valid directory, instance of directory class container. Okay. So we're checking to see that this is an instance of directory class container. We don't have our factory yet, so let's create the factory. There it is. Oh, it's so beautiful. It's a factory. It doesn't have the get container method, so let's do that. And of course, what is this? Source. Okay, return null. Let's run the tests. It's going to fail, and it failed. Assertion failed because it's not of that type. Okay, fine. So it needs to return a new directory class container. And what's the problem with that? Oh, look. Boom. Okay. And what's the problem with that? Well, get container. Oh, look at that. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do this because it's generic. It said object, and we actually want it to be, I'm not going to do that. I want it to be a class container. base at the moment, right? So I want it to be an instance of that. Okay. And this needs to be source. Okay. Now it should pass, I believe. Nope. Why? Oh, right. Because that has to throw the exception as well. Okay. Now let's see. Okay. So our factory now is a simple get container. Get container returns to us the directory. That's great. Now let's call the same thing, get container. Now we're going to pass it a jar file. And so we should get an archive directory. An archive class container. Assert true, same thing. Container. And now we're going to do get test datadir plus test.jar. All right. This needs to add the exception. Instance of class container. Should be good. Run the tests. This should fail. Why? Well, it fails because our ClassContainerFactory only returns a directory class container, and a directory class container does not recognize a jar file as valid. So let's do a little bit here. If new file, and that needs an import, good, source. So if it's a directory, then let's return return a directory class container. Otherwise, we'll return an archive class container, a new archive class container source. Okay, so now our factory, which is relatively simple, can return either a directory class container or an archive class container. And this test should then pass. All right. So that's pretty good, but it's not quite complete. We have tested a directory. We've tested a archive file. What we've not done is we've not tested for a missing file, and that's going to still throw an exception for us. So missing file. Throw the exception. Okay, so let's do our usual equals get builder plus focus. That's fine. And then we're going to say ClassContainerFactory get container source, and of course that we need to surround with a try catch. This should have failed. this, we're going to say cert equals and I always forget what the message is, so we're going to cheat. And we're going to run the test. It will fail because the cert equals will fail. And it should be invalid directory or container file. Plus source. Go again. These should all pass. Okay, at this point, our really basic factory is pretty much put together, and we can begin the next step of this particular refactoring. All right, so let's begin the next phase with a quick check-in. So let's see where we are. Right, we've added the factory, we've added the test. So we're going to do add and introduce factory. Good. Great. Very good. Okay. So actually here in FileManager now, we're no longer going to call ClassContainer. What we're going to call is the ClassContainerFactory. And we're going to what am I doing? Get container. There we go. And we are going to pass that file name. Okay, and this doesn't like it because we don't want to cast it. We're going to actually change the array list to a class container base. Should be fine. Hang on, you know what? I'm going to do this manually because I know it's not that hard. All right. So that's good. So basically we've changed this so that it will now use response from the factory, which is anything that implements or extends, sorry, class container base. Let's make sure it runs. Doesn't. Why? Because this is base as well. And it doesn't like get file. That's interesting. So let's look at this. Doesn't have get file. Class container still has get file. So let's go ahead and pull that up into the base. Place this occurrence. Archive class container. Location. Oh, interesting. Let's actually do that so that there's no reference to location in the subclasses. Let's try that. Interesting. Okay. Okay, good. All right. So FileManager now uses the base class and the factory, and basically class container is no longer used. So what I want to do is, I actually don't like class container base. I want to first eliminate class container and then rename class container base to class container. So let's do a, nope, let's actually go ahead and implement factory in FileManager. Okay, we're good. All right, great. Now let's do a safe delete. Don't care about comments and strings. Actually don't care about text occurrences either. Okay, so class container is actually gone. I think there might be a class container test, which doesn't do anything anymore. Remember this one. So we can actually get rid of it because we moved all of the stuff that was in here into more more specific test classes. So this should be able to go very easily. Boom, it's gone. Okay, now our class container base, we should be able to rename class container. Run the tests. All good. FileManager is now class container, calls a factory, which gets the container based on the file name, adds it to our class containers. Let's go ahead and inline this. Pretty easy. Okay. Now we've still got responsibility in here that is around class files and some other stuff. We're going to take a look at that in a minute. I just happen to notice it. I think we are about set on that refactoring. One more test run. One more look at what we changed. Okay, so we did a rename, right? That updated a bunch of stuff, so let's just add everything to make sure. And rename class container. Looking good. All right, so I want to do something here. We are in FileManager. We're looking at add directory. Looks pretty straightforward. What I wanted to show us, I'm going to go over here and we're going to take a look at, so this is GitHub. I just basically pushed these changes, this branch, to GitHub, and then I did a comparison of FileManager in this particular branch at this moment in time, contrasted against what FileManager looked like when we started. And I just want to walk through this a little bit. So Directories, of course, is gone. We've replaced it with an array list of class containers with explicit type class container as opposed to just kind of general there. So we got rid of the directories concept altogether. That doesn't seem like much of a change. Let's look at add directory. So add directory originally received a name and did a bunch of different work and made a bunch of different decisions. And if these conditions weren't met, if these conditions worked out, it added the directory. Otherwise, it threw an exception. And what we've done now after these changes is add directory is a single line. And it basically just says, hey, class containers, add whatever you get back from this factory. And the factory now has all of that. The factory doesn't even have that responsibility. Sorry, the factory now makes a decision based on whether or not the file is a directory, and it returns back to us a specific type of container that is either directory or archive, both of which extend class container, so both of which are able to be appended to this particular collection. So all of that decision making has been moved elsewhere, and we've effectively eliminated at least some of these conditionals. Yes, there's still the one conditional in the factory, but we're going to start to see the benefit of that in the future here. So that's kind of what we've been focusing on. I know it seems like it's a relatively small change, but a lot of this, I still believe that where we are so far is going to allow for a bunch of other complexity to start to unravel. So, yeah. Okay, so we've made these changes to add directory, and I think we're going to wrap up episode 4, and let's take a look at what we're going to do in episode 5. So again, add directory is done. Let's see where this is actually called. Now it turns out that it's called from our tests and from JDepend. So let's go to JDepend. That is called from add directory. Where's that called? Again, a bunch of tests, including a profiling harness, and then 2 other instances of JDepend. And these are JDepend that are inside of specific implementations. So like a text UI or a swing UI implementation. So let's just take a look at one of those. It's our swing UI. Add directory, of course, is inside of add directory, and we're calling the analyzer. Our analyzer is, of course, the base JDepend. So where does this get called? This gets called in the main. The main does some checking of stuff and things based on the arguments that are passed in. I don't actually care about that right now, or don't want to care about this mess right now. What I do care is that it actually calls add directory. It increases the directory count. And eventually this loop, which is iterating through the arguments that have been passed in, exits, and we should have a list of directories, and we should have a directory count. If the directory count is 0, then we return something, and then we call analyze. Okay, so what does analyze do? Analyze is still in the swing UI JDepend. That calls display. I'm assuming it starts parse responder. Great. Okay, then it actually calls count classes. It's fine. So then it calls analyzer analyze. Analyzer is, of course, our JDepend from the core framework. What does analyze there do? It's our Java class builder. And then it analyzes the classes that are in there. That's interesting. So let's see what build does. Build calls FileManager, extract files, and then looks like it tries to build classes and add them all to our list of classes. What does FileManager extract files do? Creates a collection of files. And look where we are. This is our class container in our ClassContainers list. It calls collect files with each of the files from the container item. And then collect files looks like it tries to decide if that's a directory or not, and if it is, add it to our list of files, otherwise some other stuff and things. Now, if you remember, our container is smart enough to already know if it's a directory. So it looks like we might be able to do some stuff in here where perhaps we start to push some logic into the containers and clean some of this up. I'm not entirely positive, but we will figure that out in episode 5 as we go along. All right, so let's call that a wrap for episode 4, and we will recommence with episode 5, where we will continue to pick apart the FileManager until maybe someday it actually makes sense to us. If you've enjoyed the video series, please give it the thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I appreciate all the feedback that I've been getting from folks. It's been a lot of fun doing this, and I look forward to continuing the series for some indefinite period of time. See you soon.